Okay, so let's talk about Meghan Markle, because this story was never really just about her. It's always been about the story around her, the version of events we're constantly fed, and how that version keeps shifting depending on who's talking and what needs protecting. For years now, we've been told the same polished narrative on repeat. Meghan the self-made woman, Meghan the fearless activist, Meghan the victim of a cruel, racist, sexist media machine. And sure, parts of that story might be true. No one's denying that. But there has always been this uncomfortable feeling that something is missing. Like pieces of the puzzle were quietly removed before anyone could see the full picture. And every time people start asking questions, the conversation somehow circles right back to her family, especially her parents, Thomas Markle and Doria Ragland. For years, Thomas has been painted as the villain of this story, the embarrassing father, the paparazzi staging, interview giving, attention hungry dad who just wouldn't stay quiet. And yes, he made mistakes, big ones. No one's pretending otherwise. But what almost never gets talked about is the fact that by most accounts, Thomas was a primary caregiver during Meghan's teenage years. He paid for private school, he paid for college, he showed up. He was there for school events, milestones, and the everyday grind of parenting. So then the question nobody seems comfortable answering is simple. Where was Doria? You hear these vague phrases thrown around. She was absent, she was away, she was doing her own thing. But what does that actually mean? For how long was she gone? Months? Years? At what age? No one ever gives a clear timeline, and that's exactly where suspicion starts to creep in. Because when a story is clean, people don't avoid details. They clarify them. Yet somehow Doria is always presented as this untouchable figure. Calm, peaceful, yoga-loving, soft-spoken, supportive. She was front and center at the royal wedding, smiling serenely while the cameras rolled, and meanwhile Thomas was completely cut off, erased, frozen out like he never existed. And that's where the math stops making sense. If Thomas was the one raising Meghan during those formative years, why is he the one treated like a criminal? Why is Doria the one rewarded with loyalty, access, and protection? It just doesn't add up. And look, no one is saying families aren't complicated. They are. Messy, emotional, full of baggage. But the punishment here feels extreme. Cutting off a father entirely, especially one with serious health issues over staged paparazzi photos, that reaction feels bigger than the crime. It feels personal. It feels like something deeper is being buried. Then things took an even stranger turn with that GB News moment, the one people still whisper about, when a panelist casually claimed that Doria had gone to prison. That wasn't some random comment buried in an obscure blog. It happened live on air. And here's the part that made people's eyebrows shoot up. There was no immediate denial, no outrage, no legal threats, just awkward laughter and a quick change of subject. And that silence was loud. Because let's be honest, Meghan Markle does not hesitate when it comes to lawyers. She has sued media outlets for far less. Stories have been shut down in hours before. So why not this one? Why let something that explosive just hang in the air? That silence created a vacuum, and people rushed in to fill it with speculation. Old rumors resurfaced. The missing years, the unclear timeline, the vague explanations. Suddenly, what once sounded like fringe gossip started to feel deliberate. Because rumors don't survive this long unless something keeps feeding them. And what keeps feeding them is the lack of a clear, consistent story about Doria's absence. If there were a simple explanation, it would have been laid out years ago. One interview, one timeline, one honest answer. But instead, every attempt to smooth things over only creates more questions. Then came Netflix. With Love, Meghan was supposed to be her moment, her safe space, her chance to finally control the narrative and show the world her truth without interference. But when it dropped, something felt off. There was no massive cultural moment, no overwhelming buzz. The show just landed. And Netflix didn't even bother polishing it. They left in the awkward pauses, the uncomfortable reactions, the moments where Meghan clearly wasn't getting the validation she expected. It almost felt like Netflix was quietly stepping back, letting the cracks show, preparing for the ground to shift beneath her. And that's when people really started paying attention. Rewatching, rewinding, analyzing facial expressions, tone changes, micro moments. And right on cue, the old questions came roaring back. Then, out of nowhere, that sex tape rumor popped up again. A story that should have died years ago. Some Hollywood guy claiming he was offered it. Normally, stories like that disappear instantly. Lawyers intervene, cease and desist letters fly, the narrative gets buried. But this one just lingered. No aggressive denial, no lawsuit, just silence. And no one is saying it's real. No one knows. But the fact that it hasn't been crushed feeds the idea that there are things they don't want dragged into daylight. And then came the People magazine article. Fully aligned, no friction, stronger than ever. Please, that's not how people talk when everything is actually fine. That's how people talk when they're doing damage control. When they're trying to reassure an audience that's already doubting. And it backfired. Because confident people don't constantly announce how confident they are. When you have to insist everything is perfect, people start wondering what you're hiding. This story isn't just about Meghan's family drama, it's bigger than that. It's about media manipulation, about narrative control, about how uncomfortable questions get ignored while a carefully crafted image gets pushed over and over again. And the criticism isn't coming from one corner anymore. It's coming from everywhere. Different backgrounds, different political views, different generations. You can't just label everyone jealous or hateful and move on. Something shifted. The old playbook stopped working. People are seeing through the performance. And the harder the narrative is controlled, the more suspicious it feels. That's why this story refuses to die. Because it's unfinished. The pieces don't fit. The explanations don't line up. And until the missing years, the conflicting stories, and the treatment of Thomas Markle are honestly addressed, the speculation won't stop. People don't need proof to feel uneasy. They just need that gut feeling that something isn't right. And right now, a lot of people have it. They're dissecting interviews, rewatching footage, looking past the polished sound bites to find the truth behind the facade. So what happens next? No one really knows. But it feels far from over. Because when you zoom out, this whole mess feels like a symptom of something bigger. A world where image is everything. Where people are so desperate to control their narrative that they'll rewrite history, cut off family, and gaslight the public without blinking. And Meghan, whether people want to admit it or not, is incredibly skilled at this game. She knows how to play the victim. She knows how to manipulate media cycles. She knows how to curate an image that shields her from scrutiny. But cracks are starting to show. Look at the Sussex Survivors Club. Former staffers reportedly terrified to speak openly. That alone raises eyebrows. And then there's Harry apparently reigning in some of her worst behavior. That's not exactly a glowing endorsement. And then there's Doria, the calm presence, the quiet supporter, the one who never gets questioned. More and more people are starting to wonder if she's not just an observer, but an enabler, maybe even the architect. It sounds harsh, but think about it. Doria has been there behind the scenes, helping Meghan navigate Hollywood, shape her image, and control the narrative. Always protected, always presented as untouchable, a beacon of calm. But what if that too is part of the construction? What if she's been pulling strings all along, protecting Meghan at any cost, even if it meant sacrificing Thomas? It wouldn't be the first time a parent put their child's interests above everything else. And the media has played along, afraid of being labeled, afraid of backlash, afraid of touching the third rail. So they ignored red flags, glossed over inconsistencies, gave free passes where none were earned, but that fear is fading, the tide is turning, people are starting to ask harder questions, and the carefully constructed image is starting to crumble. The Netflix deal is wobbling, public trust is eroding, the media is getting bolder, and once that happens, it's almost impossible to put the mask back on. I don't know how this ends. Maybe Meghan finally addresses the missing years honestly. Maybe she doubles down and tightens control even more. Or maybe she fades from the spotlight, leaving behind the wreckage of a narrative that couldn't survive scrutiny. But one thing is certain, this story isn't over. Not even close. There are too many unanswered questions, too many contradictions, too many people determined to dig deeper. And as long as that's true, this saga will continue to fascinate, divide, and expose. Divide and expose. Divide and expose.